Hello, Ed here from Crystal Clear Aquatics, and today I've just come to do some work on a pond that I recently built, and as part of the construction we installed this new third generation Oase filtoclear, which I've just come to do a little bit of work on. Now, Oase have made a few tweaks and alterations and overall improvements to this third generation of filtoclear. So this is a good opportunity for me to strip the unit apart, to document how to clean and service the unit and how to get to all the various components, the foams, the UVC, the quartz sleeve, etc. Now, initially, this unit might look very similar to the second and in fact the original generation Oase filtoclears. The concept is much the same. It's a completely sealed, pressurized unit, a canister filter that can be concealed and buried in the ground, which makes it a lot more discreet. Maintenance on something like this is very simple, and one can perform a backwash on the system every couple of weeks or monthly. This particular unit, anything blue, which is typical with Oase, they like to colour code this, anything blue is mechanical and it does something. So in this instance you've got a lever here which when you pull will compress the foams, releasing some of the debris and the silt that have been caught up in amongst the filter media, and then with the rotation of a valve you can divert water away from the filter to flush it through and backwash the system, and then when the water is running clear you can then put it back onto the filtration mode. Systems like this are fantastic because quite often with the old traditional box filters that were pump fed and sort of gravity discharged back into the pond, you're very limited with where you can position those units. They have to be higher than the pond level because of course they're relying on gravity to empty back into the pond, and more often than not people want to use streams or cascades as an attractive and convenient way of then discharging water from the filter back into the pond, and so that means that the outlet from that filter has to be higher than the top of the cascade or the stream that you're draining into. And so invariably people end up positioning these units, which don't look very attractive, right at the highest point of the pond in full view of everybody, and they just don't look very nice. So having a pressurized unit like this can be a lot more discreet, and it means that you can position it well away from the pond and supply water to and from via flexible hose, or you could use rigid pipe if you wanted to use solvent well fittings. But it also means, because it's sealed, it retains the pressure of the pump, and that allows you to position this unit lower than potential water level. Now of course I wouldn't recommend housing this unit lower than pond level, because when you come to do any servicing and maintenance on this and you disconnect and uncouple the pipework, or you open up and depressurize the system, your pond is then going to start to empty via the filtration system, and you're going to end up emptying the pond. So it's very important that if you position this lower than the maximum pond level, that you put some inline taps, either a slide valve or a ball valve, that you can then isolate and switch off before then uncoupling the pipework so that you don't drain your pond. Now, Oase filtoclears have been around for years, and they're a real kind of staple in terms of pressurised filtration systems for ponds, but they're not perfect. And although I've always recommended Oase gear over a lot of other equipment, there are some flaws in the filtoclear systems that I think needed to have been addressed, and I think that with this third generation they've done a good job in doing so. I think the main issue with a pressurised system like this is that general cleaning and maintenance can physically be quite difficult. You know, a lot of customers might be elderly, they might have difficulties with strength, and trying to pull this lever and compress the foams in the old units, particularly when those foams were heavily soiled and dirty, was impossible. It was very, very difficult. You know, it was a full workout trying to get this lifted up, and actually if you didn't take care of these and if you didn't regularly backwash and service them to keep the foams in good shape, it got to the stage where a backwash just wasn't good enough, and you actually had to disconnect everything, uncouple the head from the canister and manually wash the foams. Something that I would do on every service when I visit a pond, but not something that a general customer wants to do when technically a filter like this should be quite an easy system to flush through and backwash regularly. So one of the things that Oase have done is they've actually changed how the filter foams are stacked up and connected within the unit. They've actually changed the sponge itself, the foam itself, which we'll have a look at in a minute. And I have to say that the amount of exertion and sort of physical effort required in lifting this lever is, I wouldn't say effortless, but it's an awful lot easier than the old system, and I think that more people are going to manage with this than they did on the old unit, so that's a fantastic plus. Another difference to this unit is they've uprated the UVC. So this is an Oase filtoclear 31,000. The old 30,000 units would have had a 55 watt UV. This one's been uprated to a 60 watt UV. So we've got 5 watts more UV rating on there. That's also fantastic. You've got the little window here which shows you when the UV is working. But this is a almost tool-free replacement. You have got a safety screw here that needs to be undone, just a Phillips screwdriver to undo the screw here. And then this system will lift up and you can remove it without removing the quartz sleeve. So a bulb change or a tube change is incredibly easy and will just take a few minutes. Again, there are flaws with systems like that, and I think that one issue is that whenever you're replacing a UV tube, it's always really important that you check and potentially clean the quartz sleeve as well, because it's pointless putting a new, fresh UV tube into a system if your quartz sleeve is dirty and covered in algae or covered in limescale and obscuring the UV light from getting into contact with the water. So whatever system you've got, it's always really important to remove the quartz sleeve as well, give it an inspection, give it a clean, and make sure that it's nice and clear before replacing that and putting it back together. So even though this is a nice simple system where you can remove it without taking the quartz sleeve out, I would still then recommend doing a little bit more work and removing that quartz sleeve as well. But thankfully, the removal of the quartz sleeve on this system is equally as easy as taking out the UV tube, which I'll show you in a minute. The backwash valve here is a little bit different. The old or the second generation Oase filtoclears had a rotation anti-clockwise. Instructions were kind of embossed on the unit, and you would rotate this from the outlet position 180 degrees until it faced this way, and it would sort of click, and that would be the first position to clean. And then as you're emptying, you would start to pull the handle and compress those foams, and once the water started to run clear, you would then continue the rotation to another position. It would click. You would then do another couple of pumps, wait for that water to run clear, and then continue the rotation anti-clockwise until this finished in the original position, and that was a clean. This is back to basics, and this is very similar to the first generation of filter in that you've got two ways the valve can go. It can point in the direction of your pond to return, and when you're doing cleaning, you can point it to the direction of the discharge for cleaning, and I think that keeps things nice and simple. It's also quite easy physically to rotate that valve. That was something else that if the filter had got very dirty and the pressure inside the unit had really built up, even rotating that valve sometimes would be a little bit difficult. And if you find that, one trick that you can do is if you switch off the pump, so you're switching off the water supply to the unit, that helps to depressurize the filtration system slightly, and you'll find that it's much easier to rotate that valve. So I'm going to take this system apart, show you the insides of the unit and how the system has changed, and whilst I'm here I'm going to perform a bit of a clean as well. Now these systems are quite new to me as well, although when I installed this I had a little play. This is going to be the first time that I've performed any real kind of servicing on this new generation of filter, so we're going to be learning together, and I'm going to go through this in kind of real time. Any mistakes or difficulties I have doing this I think need to be transferred across to everybody, so let's see how easy it really is. Now initially of course I'm making sure that power supply has been cut off to this. Very simple here, I've got a switch box with all the power supply to the unit, so I've just turned it all off. The pump is off and the UV is switched off. And the first thing I want to do is to actually remove the UV itself. Now we've got a little safety screw here that just prevents this from anybody accidentally or who shouldn't be playing with this, i.e. children, unless they've got tools, it's going to prevent them from playing around with this. And once you've released that screw, which is spring loaded, you've got a little lever that you can pull out. It's got a padlock closed and an open padlock embossed on the plastic here, so it's very clear what that's for, and that means that we've now unlocked the UVC. I presume with a twist we'll be able to open this. Oh, just a pull, not a twist. There we go. Now when you install kit like this, it's very important that you've got enough slack in the flex, in the electrical flex, to allow you to pull this out. I mean, you can see how long that UV tube is, and so you've got to make sure you've got enough flexibility in the cable to allow you to do that. There's no good having a really short amount of flex, because you'll never be able to add or remove a tube, and you'll be kind of fighting around trying to uncouple it in position from here, which is just not going to be easy at all. So that's the most important thing, is make sure you've got enough flex on there to do so. Now this is an Oase or a Philips 60 watt UV tube. If you wanted to replace this, you've got a little end cap on here which just helps to hold the quart sleeve or the UV tube in position within the quart sleeve. You've got a little metal lamp holder down here. Let's see, we've got a plastic collar that rotates again with a padlock, lock and unlock emblem embossed on here, and if we rotate this anti-clockwise, that unlocks it, and then we can remove this, and that will allow us to simply uncouple the UV tube for replacement. Now obviously in this instance I'm not going to be replacing it. In general I wouldn't be handling UV tubes, or if you do, make sure you clean them. But for the sake of leaving all this apart, as I continue with the rest of this deconstruction, it's going to be easier if I leave it uncoupled like that. So that's the UV tube. Now, if you wanted to remove the quart sleeve for inspection, we've got another plastic collar here with, again, a padlock, lock and unlock. Oase have definitely got a theme going on here. So if I rotate this plastic housing here to the unlock position, and it very, very positively stops at the end position, and then with a bit of a jiggle lift that up, here we go. That removes the quart sleeve, which in this instance is lovely and clean. That's great. One of the things I wanted to do today was, because this is a new pond, there's a lot of new stonework and gravel and various things that would buffer the water, increasing the hardness and the alkalinity. It's quite possible you get calcium or limescale deposits on the quart sleeve, which is going to prevent the UV from working efficiently. So I always like to do a follow-up and make sure that this is nice and clean, and it is. Now, another improvement that Oase have made to this generation of filtoclear is they've included a little turbine, a quart sleeve cleaner. Now, when water enters the filter, it hits this little turbine here, propelling it around the quart sleeve. And this helps, this constant movement helps to prevent build-up of limescale and algae and other growths that would inhibit UV light getting into contact with the water. So these are a fantastic addition. Well done, Oase. So that's the electrics, the quart sleeve and the UV taken care of. And now it's a case of getting into the filter itself to inspect the filter media. And just like the old units, uncouple the in and the out. Some simple threaded collars here. Make sure you hang on to the O-rings and the washers, don't want to lose them. And just like with the older systems, you've got a very different inlet washer to the outlet washer, so you don't want to get those confused. Keep them safe. I shall uncouple the backwash hose, because I've been performing a little backwash before I did this, just to see how dirty the filter was. And we can finally unlock the lid from the rest of the canister. Again, this is another improvement that Oase have made, although actually I didn't have any issues with the old plastic locking collar. I think a few people used to successfully take it apart and clean the system, but they would really struggle to put it back together. And a lot of the issues they had was doing that final plastic collar, clamping that around the lid. So they've changed this one. We've got a little, let me move the camera so you can see. So the locking clamp is a metal affair now rather than the plastic one. We've got a little section here that you can flip up, which just acts as a bit of a security to stop you from being able to open the clamp. So if we pop that open, and we can now open this sort of spring-loaded clamp. It's going to be impossible to do this one-handed, but you get the idea. There we go. And we can now lift the lid off to reveal the rest of the filter. Now I've taken off the lid of the filtration system, complete with all the filter media attached, and we're now left with the canister in the ground, which would be typically filled with dirty water. Well, actually this filtration system has been operating on a new pond which doesn't have any livestock in, so it's very clean. What I would normally do if I was servicing a pond and a filter would be to get my pond vacuum out and to hoover up all of the liquid and slurry from the base of this. If you haven't got a vacuum to hand, you can use a little plastic cup or a scoop and just scoop it all out. You could be tempted to remove the canister from the ground, tip it out and put it back in, but I'd be inclined not to, because the amount of times that I used to do that and then the ground would start to cave back in, and then you'd be digging out the excavation to make sure this would sit back in the correct position so that when you recouple the ins and the outs, they're in line and fit. So it's just best not to do that. Leave it in situ and do all the various maintenance with it in the ground. Now the next thing that I would do would be to remove the locking clamp entirely, and you can simply open the metal spring-loaded contraption a little bit to expand it, and then you can just remove it. That will need to be put to one side and cleaned. I'll also remove the main O-ring. That will need to be cleaned. And the housing that the O-ring sits in, that needs to be wiped around. That's really important. Now another very important thing to do is, invariably you're going to have plants and undergrowth and various things growing around these units because everyone wants to conceal them. And when you put the lid back onto the unit and you reposition that locking clamp, if you've got bits of grass and ivy and plants and bits and pieces that get sandwiched between the lid and the base of the unit, it's not going to make a watertight seal when it's going to leak because it's under a reasonable amount of pressure. So whilst I've got the chance, I'm just going to make sure that all of this growth is out of the way. Typically it's spiky holly and stinging nettles, which is not ideal. There we go. So that when I put the lid back on, I know that I'm not going to have a risk of any plants getting in the way. There we go, that's nice and clean. The main O-ring, just going to give that a bit of a wipe through. Get rid of any slime and grit and debris, and make sure that that's going to form a nice seal when the unit gets back together. And then I'm also going to add a little bit of lubrication to this to make it a little bit easier to put the lid back on and position that clamp. And you can use silicone grease, you can use petroleum jelly or Vaseline, and just a fine layer on top of that, and then wiped off is all it needs. And that means that once I then reposition the lid on the unit, it's real kind of minimal force to push that lid down and get the clamp into place. So I'm going to leave that there. I'll also just quickly wipe around the inside of the locking clamp to make sure that there's no debris, soil, bits of grit that are going to prevent this from clamping and closing the filter as it should. Now, make sure you position it not upside down. You can tell what's up and what's down from the little thumb lever, which you then use to close and secure this, lock that into place. So that needs to be in the up position, not in the down position. So I'm just opening up that clamp to extend it a little bit to open it up, and then I'm going to spin it around so that the locking mechanism is in an accessible position for future maintenance, and then I'm going to leave that there. And now I can go over to the filter media and give that a clean. Right, so this is the bulk of the filtration system. A filter lid with the quartz sleeve and the UVC removed, and you can see the innards of the filter and the stack of filter media, which is simply different grades of open cellular filter foam. But this is one of the main differences with this generation of filtoclear compared to the old unit. It's more efficient in terms of cleaning because we've got this kind of skeletal structure around the outside of the foams, which when you're pulling that lever, improve the efficiency of that compression. And it kind of acts a bit like a spring loading system so that the foams push back down again when you release the lever. So it's a lot more efficient, but removal of the foams is a little bit harder as a result. And where previously you had a couple of Phillips screws here and this little plate which sandwiched and held the foams in place, once you removed it, you could then just remove all of the foams in one go, clean them or replace them. We now have to remove these individual plastic structure plates here in the process, which is a little bit more laborious. Now, having removed that locking plate, or the plastic plate there that holds all the foams into place, the first foam is simply removed, and then we need to remove this plastic plate here before we can remove the next foam, and we just work our way down. And to do that, these little sections here, you just press them together to release. There's one on each side. Again, this is where I need an assistant. Let's do the other side. I mean, it is simple. I can do it one-handed, although my camera work isn't so great. And then we can remove the next foam and work your way along. Now, I have checked, when you reposition these plastic plates, there's not a right way and a wrong way. They are universal. They are they're the same both ways round, so it doesn't matter which way you position this, it will fit. Okay, so it's not that much more effort involved. I'm not going to remove all of these because actually this unit's quite clean. It doesn't need to be washed any more thoroughly than just a backwash, and obviously the foams certainly don't need to be replaced. But if you were replacing the foams, which ideally should be done kind of annually or biannually, or if you're stripping it apart to give it a real thorough service, this is what you need to do. To reassemble it, obviously replace all the foams back in, and you may notice that the actual filter media itself, the foams themselves, are a different shape and size than the old filter foams. The old unit used to have, well, I think it was 5 blues and 4 reds, if I'm correct, and they were a little bit thinner. This unit is using thicker foams and less of them. Let's replace this. As I say, this is ambidextrous, so it can be positioned either way. Yeah, that's nice and simple. I don't think anyone's going to struggle to do that. So these little plastic clips, they can be removed, and in fact 2 of them fell off as I was taking the plates off initially. They very simply click back into place on a sort of a half hinge. Let's put them the right way around. There we go, like so. Repeat that on this side. Now, longevity of these, I mean, they feel like tough, durable ABS plastic, if that's the correct term. It feels like something that's not going to become brittle and break very easily, but time will tell with this. Thankfully, with Oase, they're very good at holding spares for all their units. If ever you do have to replace any of these bits and pieces, I'm sure they'll be available as a spare. Final unit on. You can see how much easier though it is to compress these. If you're familiar with the old unit, that makes a massive difference, having this skeletal structure, and I think the different shape of the filter media there, much easier. And then we'll simply tighten these screws to hold all this into position. There's a little bit more faff involved in taking these apart. Perhaps on a very cold spring morning when the water temperature's cold, I might be cursing Oase for doing this, but I think in general the improvement is much better. It's going to be a lot more efficient to be able to perform easy, regular backwashes, and that's, I think, the most important thing about filtration. It doesn't matter how good a filter you've got. If you as a client or a pond owner or whoever's doing the maintenance on your pond, if you're not able to efficiently, regularly clean and maintain a filtration system, then it's pointless having one. So the fact that you can do this so easily makes this new generation of filter so much better. So I'm just going to replace the filter lid and all the filter media back into the canister, but before I do, another important clean is to make sure that all of the plastic surface around the base of the lid is clean and free of debris. I mean, you're always going to get soil and bits of grit and sand and stuff sticking to this, and it's important that you clean as much of that off before you try to reassemble it as possible. Otherwise you're really going to struggle with that locking clamp, and it's not going to create a decent, proper, tight, watertight seal. So I'm just running around a little bit of tissue all around that, making sure that's clean. And now I can just carefully offer this up and put it back into its canister. Now initially I'm just going to take the bulk of the weight and sort of line it up to make sure it's in about the right position for the pipe work. That's going to be okay, that's going to be okay, and I know that's fine, before I then push it down into its final position. And if I rotate this clamp around, I don't know what you can see on the camera, but you might be able to see this. I probably should have done this on the head cam, but apologies for not. If I then open up this clamp a little bit, make sure that's pushed down as far as it'll go. There we go. So it's very obvious when the clamp is clamping around the lip of the lid and the lid of the canister, which is obviously what it needs to. And then once it is, you simply close the locking clamp and lock it into position. Now that is incredibly light. The old system was a very, very tight locking mechanism. This actually feels like it won't be doing anything in terms of clamping. I mean, that's so loose and easy, but it does the job. Again, I think another worthy improvement that most people are going to prefer. Now, I like to make sure that the O-rings and seals are all clean. Again, a bit of tissue around that, making sure that the threads are free of any debris and grit, that the mating surfaces, any plastic bits that are going to be touching the O-rings and seals, they're all clean. Because again, it doesn't take a lot of soil or grit to get in the way and prevent a decent watertight seal. Now the inlet is the basic flat washer. So I'll put that into place. And the return is this slightly different shaped seal. You've got this little flap on there. I presume, although I've never been told this and I haven't actually read the instructions, but I presume that that's just there. That's a typical man thing to say, isn't it? That when this is on the return, you've got a clear hose tail so you can actually see the water. And when you've got water rushing against this flap, it sort of holds it open. You can visibly see that through that clear window. So I think this is just a visual indicator to show you that the system is on and running. Now, although I've got a discharge hose here buried in the ground running off to a convenient drainage ditch, I'm not going to leave it permanently coupled up. If I was to leave it connected, it's very important that at the end of that there's either a slide valve, a ball valve, or a threaded section that you could then thread on this end cap. Or you leave it uncoupled, which is what I'm going to do, and just thread the end cap directly onto the filter. And that's because this blue valve here isn't completely watertight, and it's possible that when the filter gets dirty and the pressure inside the unit increases, that a certain amount of water could discharge off out the cleaning outlet, resulting in you draining your pond down. So keep that clamped up. I do see a lot of people that leave these permanently in position without any issues at all, but I wouldn't recommend it. And it's very simple just to undo that when you do a clean, and to then thread on the cleaning hose. Right, let's see if I remember how to put all this back together. Very importantly, again, cleaning out all of the chamber where the quartz sleeve is going to sit. The little plastic quartz sleeve cleaner with the turbine at the bottom goes in. Now again, I'm going to clean, there's a little O-ring all the way around this quartz sleeve base. I'm going to clean that up, get rid of any grit and sand on there. This area I'm working in has got very, very sandy substrate soil, and it's a real pain for just tiny little bits of gritty sand getting caught up in any of these areas. So they need to be well cleaned, and again, just a little bit of lubrication around there. Very carefully slide that in, offering this up so that the embossed open and close symbol is at the front of the system, is twisted around anti-clockwise as far as it will go. So there's a very sort of positive stop when you know that this won't go any further. So that's the open position, and when it's in that position, push it down to locate the quartz sleeve correctly, and then you can rotate it clockwise so that the padlock has rotated to the left of the filter, and that's fully closed. So that's open and that's closed. Now the last thing for me to do is to reassemble the UVC tube and the electrics and the ballast. So that just locates and pushes in very, very obviously. We've got the little metal clamp, or the base of the UV tube. Now there is a right and a wrong way for that. It can only go one way. You can see the little feet on here. If it was rotated around this way, it wouldn't work, but it's very obvious when you locate that it's not right. So you've got a 50-50 chance of getting it right first time or not. That slides over there, and then again the little locking mechanism at the base, I'm going to rotate clockwise, and that locks that into position. So that's holding the tube in place now. The little lamp spacer or holder just pushes on the top like so, and that just acts as a bit of a spacer. When we relocate this back into the quartz sleeve, it's going to make sure that the UV tube is held centrally to the quartz sleeve and not kind of touching one end of the quartz sleeve. Make sure that this is back in the open position. So that's closed, that's open, and then the painful part of very, very carefully sliding this back down the quartz sleeve. You know, when you've got a long tube like this, they're quite fragile, you need to be careful. It makes a horrible, horrible fingernails on blackboard style sound, which if you don't like, isn't going to be very nice. And that pushes into place. And that's locked into position. And then the last thing to do is to tighten up the security screw so that can't be opened. Now I'm going to turn this on and I'm going to test it to make sure that there are no leaks from the in, from the out, from the locking mechanism, and any potential leaks from where the UVC tube and quartz sleeve are all mated together. Switch on the UVC and check in the window there. Yep, that little indicator here is glowing blue. Hopefully you can see that there, that glows up blue and shows you that the UV is on. Checking to make sure that there's no leaks on any of the hosing, the ins and the outs. That's all good. Checking to make sure there's no leaks on the threaded end cap that closes off the cleaning outlet. That's good. Making sure that the blue valve, of course, is on the outlet position and not on the cleaning position, otherwise we're not going to get any water back out of the filter. So that needs to be in line with the outlet. That's all good. The little locking lever is in position so that we can't accidentally open the clamp. And there's no leaks or weeping around that clamp, so perfect. Okay, so that's quite a comprehensive service or a clean on the filter unit, but of course you would only be doing this annually or biannually when you replace the filter foams, replacing the UV tube. When it comes to a basic backwash, which you should be doing at least monthly, but ideally perhaps once a fortnight, and it's so easy to do, there's no reason why you can't even do it weekly. It only takes a couple of minutes. I'll just very quickly demonstrate how to backwash the filter clear. It's much the same as the old unit. So to backwash this new generation Oase filter clear, simply remove the threaded end cap, which just blanks off the cleaning outlet. Thread on your cleaning hose. Some people would just have water discharging straight out of the filter, but in this case we are directing the water into a little nearby gully. There we go. With all the system running, with water flowing through the filter unit, simply rotate this anti-clockwise until it's directed to the discharge. Now you'll note there's a bit of water weeping out of here. I haven't tightened that up fully, but actually that's because I've been a bit lazy and I didn't fit the flat seal when I position this. It doesn't matter if it does weep or drip here, as long as the bulk of the water is being directed to wherever you want to discharge the filter to. So now we've got water going into the unit, water coming out here. I'm currently draining the pond, so we need to be quick. And the next thing to do is to lift this blue lever and to pull it up and down 3 or 4 times. Now this old system, the old unit, used to be much harder than this. And I can do this quite simply, one-handed, kneeling down and holding the camera without too much effort. Now here, in this case, because we can't see the outlet of the pipe, I don't know how dirty the water is coming out the end of it. Oase have conveniently included a clear hose tail here again, so it's a window through to the water. Now you can see this is currently clear, but if the filter was really dirty, you'd have black or very dark brown water flowing through here. And you would leave it in this position until this window starts to go clear as clean water is flowing through. And then when it is clean, simply rotate the valve back into the filter position, and we're now returning back to the pond. To finish off a clean, remove the discharge hose and then replace that threaded blanking plate. So this has got a hose tail, an O-ring securely fitted in the base of this, but it's always worth checking to make sure it's there. There we go. And that is how simple it is to perform a clean and a backwash on the Oase filter clear. Now, pressurised systems like this Oase filter clear are not always the best choice for every pond. Every setup has different requirements. If you've got a large, heavily stocked pond or a koi pond or a very large volume of water, then a pressurised system like this probably isn't the best choice of filter for you. But for most applications, most sort of average general ponds, goldfish ponds, ponds with volumes up to perhaps 2,000 or 3,000 gallons, up to about perhaps 10,000 litres. I think you can realistically expect clean, clear water using a pressurised system, as long as you've gone with a big one like this with the 60 watt UV and you've got a suitable size pump to circulate the correct amount of water going through it. But in terms of efficiency and improvements on this to the older generation units, I think this is much, much better and well worth perhaps trading up if you've got an old generation filter clear to this newer unit for that simplicity and ease of maintenance. Right, I'm going to carry on doing some work on this pond. I hope you found this useful. I found it useful. This is the first time, as I say, that I've really taken apart and come to grips with this new generation filtoclear, and thankfully it's pretty simple and not overly fiddly, which is always a bonus. Thanks for watching. I'm Ed from Crystal Clear Aquatics. I'll see you in the next pond.